Okay, so at this point you have, pencil please. You have my signature on the bottom of your car, okay? So you've drawn your car, you've created your lines in the front, the back, all the way across the top. You got my signature on the bottom of the car telling me that you can start cutting it out. First, I'm going to show you how to change the blade on a coping saw. So that if you come across a coping saw where the blade is broke or you break a blade, then you know how to fix that. There's a handle and there's a little thing right here. You need to take your hand and hold on to this thing like that. So you're holding on to this bar and this thing at the same time while you loosen this. If you don't hold on to that, it twists the blade, which is bad. So you're holding on to this thing while you loosen this thing. And I would recommend you take it all the way off. And usually you don't have a blade here because this blade is broken. Take this thing all the way off, and then you immediately put it back on just enough that it grabs a hold. Barely on, okay? That's going to extend this thing out as far as possible. Then you're gonna take the blade, and you're gonna look at the blade. And you'll notice that there is a way that the blade works. If I pull this against my hand, it's not gonna cut my finger. If I flip it over, pull it against my hand, it would want to cut my finger. That's because the teeth are pointing this direction. They're pointing down at an angle. So that as I'm cutting, they're pointing down in that direction, okay? I'm going to get, actually it's the same. You want to make sure that the blade is cutting on the downstroke of the saw. You can feel it if you put it against your finger that this side is cutting, this side is not. This side is not going to cut my finger. That would cut if I put any effort onto it. So this thing goes in this direction so that when you're pulling on it with this thing, it's pulling down and the teeth are pointing down towards here, okay? So I'm gonna put this in here. There's some pins that are right here on here. I'm gonna fit those into here. And I'm gonna do the same thing on this side too. This is gonna be easier to do if you have, the longer this thing sticks out, let me get it in there first and then I'll keep talking. The longer this thing is sticking out, the easier it is to get those pins in those two spots here, okay? Now the teeth are pointing this direction towards the handle. Now, if I turn it at this point, you'll see the blade gets turned, twisted, and that's a damage. As you can see, I'm holding on to this and this at the same time that I'm tightening it, because if I don't, I'll destroy the blade. Okay. Nice and tight. Okay, so the blade is facing this way, and that's the way you put a blade on these things. Now, over the years, I've seen plenty of people cutting on the wrong side of their board. So I would advise you to start out by labeling the side that is trash. This side is trash, that's my car. On this side is trash, and that's my car. Okay, so my car is here and here. So when I'm using the coping saw, I'm gonna be more likely to be cutting on the trash side. Something else I'm noticing about some of these Jorgensen clamps have glue on them, like globs of glue on them. So please be careful. Check your Jorgensen clamps to make sure there's no like globs of glue on there that are potentially going to dent your projects. I'm going to take this object here, the car, and I'm going to put it in the vise this direction so that I'm cutting this direction. You do not want to put it in this way and cut this way, because if you do, your block's going to move around as you're cutting, which I don't think is likely to happen in this class because of the way these are setting on the thing. But I'm going to put this in the direction so I can cut like this, and I'm going to tighten it up. And when I tighten it, I'm going to make sure that I'm not just tightening one of them, because if you look here, you'll see that if I keep tightening down right here, it's going to pinch the car. It's going to damage it, okay? There's a gap right here. There's no gap right there, so I tighten that up a little bit. And then come down here and tighten that one up. I want these things to be parallel. If they're at a weird angle and it clamped down, I'm gonna damage my car. Okay, you want this nice and tight, and you want there to be no gaps on either side of these things. Now this works rather nicely in terms of securing this. I'm really pretty happy with this. All right, so I'm going to cut definitely away from the line. My goal at this point is not to cut right on the line, because if I try to cut right on the line, I'm likely to overcut. And I'm definitely going to create a rough cut. Instead, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure the car remains pristine and undamaged in the process of me removing as much wood as I can. So I'm actually going to try to stay more like 1/8 of an inch away the whole time, because we'll be able to use files to remove the rest of the wood as later on. So your goal right now is clear. Your goal is to remove most of the wood while never, ever touching that line on either side. Something else for you to recognize is you can't just look at one side and ignore this side. Because if you do that, sooner or later you'll look over and realize you're way overcut on the other side. So you need to constantly be checking both sides. Something else I'd like to point out is you should not be pushing down on the coping saw, thinking it's going to go faster. Okay? You're better off just moving the saw back and forth and trusting that it's going to cut through the wood. If you push down, you're likely to snap the blade. Blades cost me, somewhere between 50 cents and $1 a piece. So they're not throwaways. If they break, it is annoying, but it's not gonna break my bank either. Which means if you break your blade, the worst thing you could do is just put the saw back over there without putting a new blade on, because then we'll end up losing these pieces here. So you definitely want to replace the blade if you break the blade. You come talk to me, I'll show you where the blades are if you can't find them. As I don't want this to be a hugely long video, I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to do here. I'm going to cut down most of the way through here. Then I'm going to back the blade out. I'm going to flip the whole thing over and then cut from the other side. Now sometimes these things get a little complicated in shape, and depending on the shape you might have to cut downward to try to relieve a section. But one way or the other, our goal is to remove as much of this wood as we can without ever touching that line. As long as you never touch that line and you never touch the line over here, the next step should be able to be perfectly smoothly and go real well. Okay? So that's your that's what we're doing in this part of the project. You're removing as much clay as you can, or wood as you can, and then that should prepare you for the next video.